Hello from the Imperial War Museum in London. Once a Victorian hospital, today this iconic building is home to artefacts, stories and treasures from the First World War to the present day.
We'll be here at Britain's busiest military museum throughout Remembrance Week, celebrating courage, honouring heroes and paying tribute to those who didn't return home.
This is how the people remember. All this week, I'm joined by former Royal Marine Commando J.J. Chalmers, who suffered life-changing injuries when he was blown up in Afghanistan.
And over the next 5 days, we're joined by some familiar faces from the world of sports and entertainment.
This means the world. My family will be so happy.
And they will be sharing some special wartime memories with us.
That was honestly a gift. Thank you so much for that.
Coming up on today's programme.
Formula One commentator Murray Walker reveals his exploits in a Sherman tank during the Second World War.
A life hanging in the balance, JJ's long fight back to fitness.
And a performance from Chris de Burgh, telling the story of an old soldier.
Good morning and welcome to the Imperial War Museum in London. Founded in 1917, it's home to thousands of artefacts from a century of warfare, including the world's largest collection of Victoria Cross medals.
Yes, there are curiosities like a one-person air raid shelter, but it would have provided little protection against the menacing V2 rocket behind me. More than 1,300 were fired at Britain during the Second World War.
Well, every year, more than 1 million people visit this museum, but it's a first visit today for our special guest from the world of Formula One, Murray Walker. Wonderful to see you here on our sofas in the museum. And you have never been here before, have you?
Sophie, I'm a bit of a war buff and military enthusiast. I've always wanted to come here. I know it's almost certainly the best museum of its kind in the world. I've never been able to do it. Thanks to you, here I am.
You don't mind me saying, you're 93 years old. That would have made you a teenager at the outbreak of the Second World War.
Yeah, I was 16 when war broke out. If you volunteered, JJ, in those days, you went to where you wanted to go if you were accepted. Whereas if you waited for your conscription number to come up, you went to where they sent you. And I didn't particularly want to go to the Pioneer Corps and light smoke canisters in Wolverhampton. So I volunteered for tanks and I got accepted. 10 days before my birthday, I went down to Wool in Dorset and to Bovington, which is the home of the tank. And I did 18 months initial training, first of all at Bovington and then at Blackdown, and then I went through Sandhurst. It was the most incredible thing. General Eisenhower took my passing out parade, and the drill and procedures for the passing out parade now are identical to what we had then. And then I joined my regiment in Holland.
Well, Murray, we look forward to hearing more of your stories later on.
Fascinating. Well, from World War II to Afghanistan, and the recent war there cost the lives of 453 British servicemen and women.
And many more were wounded. This is one soldier's story of fighting back from the brink. This soldier.
I never wanted to join the army, I didn't want to join the Navy or the Air Force. I just wanted to be a Royal Marine Commando.
In 2011, new Royal Marine J.J. Chalmers deployed with 4-2 Commando on his first tour of Afghanistan.
Serving in Afghanistan is the pinnacle of any Royal Marine's career. That is your job, to be a Royal Marine Commander. That is the very existence, is to have to deploy to dangerous places and do that job. And we worked out of a small checkpoint in Afghanistan, which was about the size of a football pitch. Our main job was to be a visible presence, like a policeman.
His company was sent to Helmand province, but despite the dangers, JJ was in his element.
Afghanistan was one of the best times of my life. Just living in a compound with 14, 15 of your best friends is some of the best fun you can ever have.
One of those best mates was Cassidy Little, who shared the whole Afghanistan experience with JJ.
The good times are times like when you come in from the gate, like when you've been out for like 8 hours patrolling, and then as the final push, you get to go into water up to your chest, and it's just like, right? Like it, absolutely beautiful moment. You looked forward to that every single day.
But with daily patrols, danger was ever present.
So the first time you go on the ground is terrifying, and you think every crack in the ground, every piece of turf that's turned the wrong way is going to kill you. Round every corner there could be somebody who was trying to take your life, and then round every single step that you took there was the presence of IEDs, improvised explosive devices, and that was our biggest threat. The more steps you take, the more time you spend outside of your little checkpoint, the more danger you're in.
On the 27th of May 2011, JJ, Cassidy and their colleagues were sent to clear a suspected bomb-making factory.
It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday in Afghanistan, and it was totally normal. Now that sounds like a pretty crazy job for anyone to be doing, but that was my job, and it was something which was completely and utterly normal. And then the next thing I know, I'm lying on my back, and I am in more pain than I've ever experienced in my life.
An IED, or improvised explosive device, had detonated right in front of them, killing 2 of their colleagues and their Afghan interpreter. Both JJ and Cassidy were caught in the blast.
I felt like I'd been hit by a train. Just every single part of my body was in agony.
I took a lot of injuries to my lower body, so I had lost the right leg, nearly lost the left leg. JJ took most of his injuries to the upper body.
I brought my hand up and saw it and realized that, well, at the time, all my fingers were hanging off. And it was covered in blood and mud, and it was a horrific sight. So that hand was out of the question. I went to use my right arm, and it was gone, basically. So all I could do was pretty much scream for help.
I vaguely remember the kind of dust swirling over top. I remember my first scream, because it was like screaming through a cup of sand.
And I remember the helicopter coming in real low, and at that point I was just like, this is it.
Within 48 hours, JJ and Cassidy were both flown to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham in induced comas. JJ's girlfriend Cornelia rushed to the hospital, knowing his life was hanging in the balance.
That was the worst day of my life. I remember crying. I just couldn't stop my tears. They're just running down my face, and I just remember just couldn't stop it. I think the first thing they were worried about was the infection that could get into his body, and that could kill him. I think that was the biggest worry. I think every kind of day when he survived, that was another day that it looked good, promising.
An entire week went by before JJ was brought out of his coma.
I looked at my girlfriend Cornelia, and you could just tell that she'd just gone through the worst week of her life. You know, I was asleep, easiest thing in the world. It was horrific for her.
Seeing him, I think that was the best part, that he was back, and we could come in and after surgery see him and, and sit by his side and, I don't know, speak to him, and just he's there, so that was important.
Both JJ's arms were shattered, his right forearm was mangled, his elbow practically destroyed, and the fingers on his left hand had been blown off. With such complex injuries, recovery would be long and difficult, involving hundreds of hours of surgery and rehab. But JJ wasn't alone.
Then you look across the bed space, the 4-man bed space, and there's JJ Chalmers. And you're like, wow, it's not gonna be that bad, is it? JJ's here.
As they began their recovery in hospital, what JJ and Cassidy craved more than anything was a bit of normality.
We went out for our first pint of lager together, and we didn't tell the doctors, but when we got there and we had a pint each, it was great. How I can reflect on that time period and say it was great, but it was great.
We got to be able to sit in a bar, be normal human beings, not patients, not being poked and prodded, and just get to be old JJ and Kaz, basically.
But the one thing JJ could never go back to was being a Royal Marine Commando, something he struggled to come to terms with.
So you need to find something which is close to it, that gives you the same satisfactions. And that's what sport can do for you. And that's what the Invictus Games gave me.
So just 3 years after the explosion that tore his body apart, JJ poured all his energy into training for the Invictus Games for injured servicemen and women.
You focus on doing the sport, and then you realise all the other stuff that comes with it, all the stuff that you were missing. You know, the truly being part of a team, representing your country again, and most importantly, having that big goal that you can work towards.
The recumbent IRB1 race, and the three of them have decided that they will come across the line together here.
But the nice thing is when you realise that it wasn't the end of the story, it was just the end of the chapter, and you know, so many more amazing things can come as a result of what happened then.
Incredible to see that, JJ, and to see what you have been through and the injuries. And you know, I work with you. I don't notice your injuries actually now, but to see you in hospital with your arm in pieces.
Yeah, I mean that was a long time ago now, really. Well, that's the thing. Sometimes, I'd say it was 5 years ago, and I look at it and go, that seems like a very long time ago because of everything that's happened to me since. But I remember it like it was just yesterday, and you know, that was a very tough time, and it was pretty bleak. But the wonderful thing is that, you know, that's in the past, and now my life is better than I ever could have hoped for. So, you know, it's a growing experience.
What a thing to have been through. Murray, I mean, JJ talks about memory, remembering things vividly or not. You, aged 93, how vividly do you remember what you went through in World War II, your experiences?
But a lot of things I can remember. The camaraderie that you experience in the forces is absolutely marvellous. I mean, you're with like-minded people all trying to do the same thing. We knew that we were fighting literally an evil empire, and it was going to be the end of Britain if we didn't succeed. And that was a terrific motivation.
And you were at very famous places, famous battles, Arnhem, for example, weren't you?
We were on the island between the two rivers, and the bitterness was that because we were in tanks, you can't get across a river. Sadly, Arnhem failed, but we could see what was going on and see the parachutes hanging from the trees with the canisters of supplies that were supposed to be going to the people who were fighting, and sometimes people below the parachutes as well. But I had some amusing experiences as well. Just before we crossed the Rhine, which was the vital thing, I was coming back with my troop of tanks, and I was sitting on top of the turret with my legs inside, and as we approached the fuel and ammunition dump, I saw 4 people standing there, and I thought, that chap there looks just like my father. Military uniform. When we got closer, I saw it was my father.
No.
Yeah, and we were in the fighting area. No. And I jumped out and I said, what are you doing here? And he was the editor of a magazine, and he got himself accredited as a war correspondent. And from chums in the War Office, he'd found out where the regiment was. And I had about half an hour with him and then disappeared. But it was a tear-jerking experience.
I'm sure. And that's at the point when you crossed over the Rhine and you were right at the front, and then you fought across Germany through the latter stages.
We went up from Holland underneath Bremen and Hamburg and across the River Elbe. There was some very, very bitter fighting on the approaches to the Rhine in the Reichswald Forest, which my regiment was very much involved with. Once we got across the Rhine, things were a lot easier because the Germans were beginning to realise that they had lost or were losing the war.
And you mentioned the Battle of Reichswald, which was known. I mean, General Eisenhower described it as one of the fiercest battles of the whole campaign, and you were there.
Yes, it wasn't a lot of fun. The Germans had broken the Ruhr dams and flooded the whole area. and it was all mud and blood. I mean, when I got out, we were fighting around a place called Goch, G-O-C-H, which had been virtually flattened by a 400 RAF bomber raid. And I got out of the tank during the night, and there were dead bodies and dead animals and a dreadful smell and a ghastly noise and all the crash-bang wallop you hear in fighting. And it was just like being in Dante's Inferno. But that was... War is a beastly thing.
And those memories still presumably
I remember that, yes.
You won't forget that ever, will you? No. No. Well, we're going to talk to you more. In fact, we're going to go and see a Sherman tank shortly, because a Sherman tank is what you were driving, wasn't it?
I'll show you around.
You show me around. I really look forward to that. Well, when soldiers returned from the Second World War, physical injuries could be treated, but for many, the mental scars of war went undiagnosed and untreated.
Yes, nowadays soldiers are assessed for these kind of conditions, which are treated with just as much importance as visible injuries.
All week, we'll be bringing you stories from a very special place, the Battleback Centre. The centre is run by the Royal British Legion and helps servicemen and women with both physical and mental injuries to get their lives back on track.
For hundreds in our armed forces, the end of combat marks the beginning of a new battle.
You go through despair, you go through, you know, fear.
The spiral I was in was just a downward one, and I was getting quite worried about myself.
And if I broke down or showed any sign of not being able to cope, I felt like my family would lose hope.
But there's a place that's helping our heroes fight back. A place where the injured come to rediscover themselves over a week-long multi-activity course that focuses on the mental as much as the physical. The Battleback Centre aims to put members of our forces on their own unique road to recovery.
Thanks for being here. Great to see you all. I know for some of you, being at Battleback is going to be a stretch for some of you in the room.
Course leader Nick Moore is welcoming 24 new Battlebackers from across the forces as they begin their 5-day journey.
When they arrive, we know that for some people in the room, they are at their limits of comfort just to be around other people. What I want to do is use this rope as a gauge. So down that end is I want to be out of here and I'm in total stretch. To being down this end, I'm totally relaxed and really looking forward to the week. So we've got a pretty good spread here. So fairly relaxed, okay. Sort of moving down the line. Thanks for your honesty, Heath. That's good. And Chloe, thanks very much.
37-year-old Heath Page is an Iraq War veteran. His role as part of an extraction team saw him pulling the bodies of fallen comrades from downed helicopters.
Stuff started happening and you're thinking, actually, Christ, this is real. It didn't hit home, and then it was like, actually, we are in a war zone.
He was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and in 2014 also suffered a debilitating hip injury. He is the least convinced the course can help him.
I wasn't too keen. I've been trying to put it off and put it off and put it off. Because I've been sat at home for the last 15 months, approaching nearly 2 years, it's kind of hard to motivate myself to get back into the swing of things, if you know what I mean. I was pretty dejected.
Let's go! With the group dealing with both psychological and physical injuries, the first activity of the week is designed to level the playing field: wheelchair basketball.
You do not have to have a physical disability to play wheelchair basketball.
All of the activities that we do are simply vehicles to help them view themselves, help them view other people, and view their place in the world just a little bit differently.
For Heath, making that change is going to be a challenge. for the last 10 years, and despite further tours, he struggled with the effects of PTSD.
When I came back in 2006, obviously I was very withdrawn, very quiet, and then all of a sudden, the slightest noise, I'd twitch, I'd get very nervous, and then all of a sudden, the slightest thing, I'd snap, just like a wet Kit Kat, just smash the house up.
We're making the chimp sound really bad, aren't we? But actually, do you know what? It's not good, it's not bad, it is just the chimp. So,
After each activity, there's a debrief, moving the focus from physical to mental well-being. Discussing what makes them angry and how to deal with it is the group's first exercise today.
And I hate incompetence.
And for Heath, sceptical on arrival, things are starting to change.
But work at Tuesday morning, complete different attitude. I was like ready and raring to go. Thought make most of it and see what happens. And to be honest, I've been surprised. Seeing ladies and gents in a similar situation kind of opened my eyes and thought to myself, well, I'm not the only one going through it. So get a grip, stop feeling sorry for yourself and crack on. Who's stuck?
Today's all about building on the team's camaraderie, in caves and up walls.
We will see battlebackers who struggle with some of the activities we do, especially on the top of experiences they might have had in the past. It's a great opportunity for some people to be able to desensitize some of the negative emotions around firearms and shooting and see it in a very, very different light.
But there's one person missing from the gun range. For him, it's a test too far.
I'm a bit dubious about loud noises, bangs and stuff like that. I thought, I don't really want to do that. So I kind of had a word with my instructor, and it transpired that I could actually go and play some golf, which I did enjoy actually. So.
As the course goes on, Heath and the group will continue to push themselves physically. Question what they believe.
Actually, I think you've been a bit of a fraud when you see some of the lads, the terrible injuries that they've got.
And try to find their own way onto the road to recovery. Joining us on the sofa is someone who's benefited from the Battle Back programme as part of his recovery, and he's now a successful athlete fresh from the Rio Paralympics, Mickey Yule. Mickey, can you tell us how you were injured in Afghanistan?
Well, I was a Servant Roy engineer, and unfortunately IEDs were the massive threat for every soldier out there. Our job was to go out, try and locate the IEDs and if possible make them safe.
And you lost both legs though, doing it?
I lost both legs, but I was lucky to survive it. I know guys that didn't survive it and unfortunately paid the ultimate price.
How much did the Battle Back Centre help you?
It got us out our beds, it got us involved in sport. They had us rock climbing. I had no legs and we were rock climbing. And we achieved some great stuff in Battle Back. And Battle Back was the reason I first got into sport.
And tell us about Rio, what you were doing and how you did.
So I do Paralympic powerlifting.
I would have never guessed.
No, I'm not skillful. I've never been skillful at any sport, but I can lift heavy stuff.
Is it real?
It's really real. It's like the caveman sport of Paralympics. And so we went, worked hard, managed to qualify, and on the day came 6th, which, considering I got medical discharge in 2013, I was really happy with.
That's a short amount of time, 3 years from discharge to being in Rio, but the military attitude helps with that, doesn't it?
And you know what, as you know, we all got together there and we had our own little military group out there and we all pushed each other on because sometimes it is hard to express what you're feeling. There we would meet up for coffees and maybe the odd beer when we were allowed, and we would just get our heads around where we were and actually encourage each other to say, listen, we were all doing rehab 5 years ago, so whatever life brings to us, we can smash it. We can set ourselves the goals again and we can push on together as a team.
Before that, you took part in the Invictus Games as well.
We've just finished recently the 2nd Invictus Games in Orlando, and the Americans took it to the next level with their showbiz and all their massive sort of it was in Disneyland, you know what I mean? It was, that sums up where the Americans took it. And the next one's going to be in Toronto. And every time the Invictus Games happen, it gets someone out their bed, it gets someone positive, it gives them goals to set, and not only helps the soldiers with injuries, but it helps their families as well, which is a thing that can never be forgotten.
Thank you very much, Mickey. Good seeing you again.
Thanks.
Still to come in today's programme. A rare peek behind the scenes of the museum. Wow, a change of history right there.
Yeah, absolutely.
We spring a surprise reunion on JJ.
And Christa Berg performs his new song, The Soldier.
So Murray, this is your first time to the Imperial War Museum, so we had to bring you here. The Sherman tank. This is basically what you drove, isn't it?
It's an old friend. It's an old friend, Sophie. I drove one for an hour last year, and it's like riding a bicycle. You don't forget how to do it. Yeah. They're very easy to drive, actually, but you very, very quickly get the knack of it. This was just like driving a Cadillac in a way. Not that I did any driving. I gave the instructions to the driver through radio. He was wearing headphones.
But I mean, there was 4 of you in this, and it does look huge, but I'm guessing inside it was quite tight.
It was pretty friendly inside, JJ, yes. But I was standing on the seat most of the time, out of the way of the gunner.
Did you not feel quite vulnerable? Because you are the one, your head sticking up out of the turret.
I did feel quite vulnerable, actually, Sophie, because you were extremely vulnerable if there were snipers about. But it was better than being in the infantry because they hadn't got any protection at all.
Yeah.
You entered the war very late, so you were going across Germany, presumably with the German army retreating. I was watching you standing here next to the tank. I mean, just describe what it was like for you in your tank, going into Germany, watching the German soldiers pull back.
It was an incredible experience. The last few days of the war, we had this instruction to get to Wismar and Lübeck before the Russians. And on a piece of their equivalent of a B road, Sophie, a narrow road, the British Army, led by us, the Greys, were going eastwards. And on the same piece of road, the German army was retreating at 5,000 an hour. And we stopped at one point where there was a traffic jam, and I was sitting on the turret with my legs inside, and I was eating a tin of Spam, and I looked down, and there was a Mercedes-Benz staff car, open one, with 4 obviously high-ranking German officers in it. And I looked at them, and they looked at me, and neither of us took any notice of each other, and the traffic jam broke, and we went our separate ways. I don't know what happened to them.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. Well, listen, it's your first time at these museums, so we're going to let you have a look around, shall we?
Thank you very much.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Now, all around the museum are reminders of the mortal danger faced by those on the front line. For centuries, many have prepared for the worst by writing a farewell letter. This week, we'll be hearing a selection of these from conflicts past and present.
Major Arthur Hayland fought back from injury to lead his men in one of history's most famous battles. The Battle of Waterloo on the 18th of June, 1815, would be Arthur's last stand. He was shot and killed, leaving a pregnant wife and 6 children. His great-great-great-grandson, Michael Hayland, reads the letter Arthur wrote on the eve of that battle.
My dear Mary, let the recollection console you that the happiest days of my life have been from your love and affection, and that I die loving only you. We cannot, my own love, die together. One or other must witness the loss of what we love most. Let my children console you, my love, my Mary. The only regret I shall have in quitting this world will arise from the sorrow it will cause you and our children. The hazards of a military life are considerable, but still has its pleasures, and it appears to me of no consequence whether a man dies young or old, provided he be employed in fulfilling the duties of the situation he is placed in this world. I have no desponding ideas of entering the field, but I cannot help thinking it almost impossible I should escape either wounds or death.
I'm behind the scenes of the Imperial War Museum in one of the documents and archives room, which holds millions of diaries, letters, all sorts from a century's worth of conflict. And I'm lucky enough to be joining one of the curators, Anthony Richards, who's going to take us through some of the best examples that they have on offer.
Right, well, we've got some of the real treasures from the collection today. First of all, we've got one of the most important things that we hold, which is Hitler's final testament. Wow. Which is the last document he ever put his name to. And if we look at the final page, you'll be able to see that it was signed on the 29th of April 1945 at 4 in the morning.
Where was this found?
Well, there's an interesting story behind that. The German soldier whose job it was to courier it to the Nazi Party archives in Munich kept it secret. And he was finally captured in November, and when he was searched, this document was sewn into the inside of his clothing.
Wow. So this is Hitler's signature?
Absolutely, and the interesting thing is to compare his signature here, which is possibly the last time he ever signed his name, to an earlier example that we have. And this document is Hitler's order to invade Poland.
But this is the signature. This is the pen to paper that started the war.
Absolutely. You can see the difference, that this early signature is very bold and confident, but the signature on the will, which is possibly the last thing he ever signed, you can see how his mind has deteriorated and he can hardly pick the pen up.
What's next?
So, staying with the Second World War, we have an example of a speech written by Winston Churchill.
Wow.
And this particular speech includes the famous line, "This is not the end, it is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning."
Wow. And it's amazing to see the scribbles, and in fact, even the way that it's written. I mean, you can almost hear how he speaks through it.
And you can see that he's actually changed bits in his own hand. So even the famous line, "It is not the beginning and the end," he's moved the perhaps along a bit, you see.
Wow, a change of history right
there.
there.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's interesting because it shows that he was constantly sort of thinking about the best way to put across his message.
This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
Now, earlier we saw JJ battle back from life-threatening injuries, but we had a little surprise up our sleeve when we caught up with him at home near Edinburgh. JJ's life was changed forever when an IED exploded beneath him on his first tour of Afghanistan.
Your life will never be the same again. That you'll never be exactly the person you were. I'll never be a serving Royal Marine Commando. You know, I'll always be a Marine. I'll always have the mentality of being in the Marines, but I'll never be able to do that job again. That's it.
Coming to terms with life outside the Royal Marines was a tough test, and something he couldn't have done without his girlfriend Cornelia.
It's as simple as saying I just wouldn't be here. I can't even imagine what I would look like now if I didn't have her.
I think we're quite good together as a couple, so anytime JJ kind of struggle, I'll just feel like, okay, you know, I'm the strong one here, and let's just get a grip and let's get through it and let's get better and let's find things that you can do really well.
Last year they got married and used their wedding as an opportunity to thank everyone who'd helped in JJ's recovery.
that when you're the center, you know, the center of this ripple effect, how many people it touches and how many people it takes to put somebody back on their feet. So having an opportunity like a wedding to be able to bring everyone together and have them under one roof, and that's the nicest thing. We just put on a big, massive party for everybody and we danced the night away.
In fact, JJ had already begun practicing for their first dance in Afghanistan before he was injured, with the help of his friend and fellow commando, Cassidy. Before the army, he had trained as a dancer.
So I was like, well, we've got nothing better to do. Why don't you just teach me how to waltz?
And the lads all kind of saw what was going on and kind of came and sat around, and I taught them, you know, forward 2, 3, back 2, 3.
You got two Royal Marine Commandos in their prime, on the front line in Afghanistan, in their pants, waltzing with each other in this stupid little compound in the middle of nowhere.
It was a really sweet, light moment in a very dark and heavy place.
JJ clearly learnt from the best, because Cassidy went on to win the People's Strictly 4 years later. A year after their wedding, JJ and Cornelia now have a new addition to the family, 5-week-old Hayley. What JJ doesn't know is that he is about to get a big surprise. He hasn't seen his best friend Cassidy for months.
Love to.
Sorry.
No, this is a terrible location.
Cassidy has driven hundreds of miles to meet the new baby.
Say hello.
Oh, wow.
She's awesome. Being a father is one of the best things I've ever done, and I have no doubt you're going to discover that. The cradle comes down.
Hello, sweet pea. Hello.
Oh, man. Yeah, totally, before they just straight up snap off. Wow.
This is the noises she makes at night.
It's nervy.
And you're just kind of like, is she awake? Is she awake?
Little growing noises.
Is she awake?
But yeah, it's pretty nice.
Dude, it's so good to see you.
And with Hayley asleep, it's a chance for the new dads to catch up.
See, this whole having a kid's like being in training.
Yeah.
Like getting no sleep, like being covered in poop.
Yeah.
Carrying something around all the time that's like weighs 21 pounds.
Yeah.
and just, but at the same time, it's the best thing you'll ever do. Like it's all worth it in the end.
Yeah. I try and think back to what my life was like after the explosion, but before the birth of Allegra.
Yeah.
It was just like, so that's what was missing.
And never far from their minds are their fallen comrades.
I don't have any survivor's guilt anymore. I don't have that sensation of, you know, I feel honored to have the opportunity to become a father when other people haven't had that opportunity.
And I do acknowledge that it's rubbish to have lost them, but I'm so glad that we knew them.
The two men killed were military cross winner Sam Alexander and Lieutenant Oliver Augustine, their troop commander.
I do everything I do to honour those guys, but now you've got that added reason that you want to be a shining example to your children.
He even thought of them when naming his baby.
I want my kids to know about Sam and Ollie. I want them to know that well, in fact, Hayley's middle name is Olivia for that very reason, because I want them to know that, you know, we live in a world where we live on borrowed, you know, their dad lives on borrowed time, the time that he borrowed from, you know, 2, if not more, incredible people.
She's gorgeous.
Yeah, she's a real joy, but not quite between the hours of 4 and 6.
Yes, I know that feeling.
Anyway, that's nearly it for today's programme. But joining us for a very special musical performance is Krista Berg.
Welcome
Hello.
to the People
Thank you very
Remember.
much.
Wonderful to see you here. Now, this is your first time here at the Imperial War Museum,
Extraordinary,
isn't it?
because I come from a military background. My father was a colonel in SOE, and my grandfather, General Sir Eric de Berg, fought in the Boer War and also in the Great War, and was chief of the general staff at the beginning of the Second World War.
Really steeped in military history.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, today you're singing a very special song. What's the influence for it?
Well, it's from my new album, which is called A Better World, and it's about an elderly gentleman, a war hero who lived alone. It's just a way of remembering the elderly, particularly those who've done some service for their country.
We'll let you play it, Chris. Thank you.
old man with his memories, no friends or family. They say he'd been a soldier and a hero from the war, a solitary man who lived alone. And on the day he died, his medals were by his side, and a letter in his hand that said, I have always been a soldier, I have served my king and my queen, and now I'm getting older, I can only dream. When I make that final journey, I will turn my face to the sea. And in this world of changes, please remember me. The paper ran a story on this brave and humble man. There's no one here to mourn him. Can someone lend a hand? And on the day they brought him down to the place where he would lie, there were thousands on the street to say goodbye. And many more would come on the days and months ahead, to read these words in stone that said, I have always been a soldier, I have served my king and my queen. Though I'm getting older, I can only dream. When I make that final journey, I will turn my face to the sea. And in this world of changes, please remember me. In this world of changes, please remember me.
Chris de Burgh and his new song, The Soldier.
Well, that's it for today. Murray, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experience.
My pleasure.
Well, coming up in tomorrow's programme, a journey back to the Somme battlefield.
What a waste.
A breakthrough at the Battleback Centre.
Queen of the World!
And our special guest is four-time Olympic gold medalist Sir Matthew Pinsent.
But for now, from all of us here at the Imperial War Museum in London, goodbye.
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 Monday morning on BBC One, it's Hammer Time next, with an old chapel going up for auction. Claimed and shamed at 11, the bus passenger who pretended to be injured in an accident that didn't actually happen. And at 11:45, the housing enforcers chased tenants who wrecked their council property. All to come.